Let's do this. Let's do this. Hello, everyone. How are you? My name is Luke Thomas. It is, what time is it? It is 3:05. I got this one going a little bit late here on this 21st day of May 2026. Thank you so much for joining me. This is episode, what number is this? 303, I believe. Yes, 303 of my live chat. Thank you so much for joining me. What a wonderful day for you to be here. On the docket today, I mean, man, there's actually a fair bit to talk about. There was news this morning that Scott Coker is trying to launch as it was reported, global MMA league. We don't have a lot of details other than the people he's involved with are pretty well connected. He raised about $60 million. I have a lot of thoughts about that. We could talk about Colby Covington retiring, the fallout from the the MVP, one card and the numbers, and really anything else on your mind. Yeah, so that's it. So thumbs up if you'd be so kind. Hit subscribe if you'd be so kind. As I mentioned, thank you for being here. We got a lot to get to. So without further ado, let's get this party started, shall we? So the way this works is I put up a post on youtube.com/Luke Thomas. I ask for questions. I did not put it up yesterday because I had a lot going on yesterday, but I put one up this morning. You guys fill it up. Then you vote to the top which ones you want. We'll do that for about an hour. And then after that, we will, we will go to the paid portion where you don't have to, but if you'd be so kind, it goes a long way. You can support the channel by getting a donation into the super chat. Put your question in there. We'll put it on the screen. And we'll talk about it or comment or whatever you want, right? There's a way around that, of course, which is if you become a member, you can do that for free. Don't fire like 15 of them in there, but we'll take a couple of them along the way for sure. No charge, right? And just if you have any issues, tag Othello. He's in the chat. He'll help you out. Okay? All right. My wife has been gone again on a work trip, and she gets back today, which is great because that means I don't have to both take Tuki to school and pick her up every single day, which is a lot. All right, let's do this. Let's share my screen. And then we'll do this. Okay. All right, but let's do this one. Oops, hang on. Wait, sorry. This one. There we go. Hey, Luke, loved what you had to say on Submission Radio about Mark Shapiro's ridiculously hypocritical comments on the MVP card, but it's crazy how many fans seem to have the same perspective as him. I've debated people on my own MMA page, and some people are receptive about how a UFC monopoly is bad for the sport, but some are too far gone. I would actually argue most. How has TKO cultivated this loyal following despite constantly showing fans that they don't care what they think? Of course, the UFC puts on the highest level fights most consistently, but why are UFC loyalists so resistant to change, in your opinion? This is a very easy one to answer, actually. So if you've been around as long as I have, if you've seen as much as I have, then what you'll remember is that when Pride was at its very best, when Pride was at its peak, people did this with Pride. And in fact, people used to clown when the UFC heavyweight division was like Tim Sylvia and Gan McGee. Anybody know that name? When it was them, and, Tim Sylvia wins, and after that fight, he calls out Fedor, and they're talking about Fedor on the broadcast for a little bit. Joe Rogan is anyway. People at that time were like, yeah, right. Like, this is a joke. This is a joke. Pride has the far better fights and the far better fighters. And then at some point, it kind of evened out, and then UFC pulled ahead, and then they haven't looked back since. This would be certainly post Ultimate Fighter, no, because Pride was still killing it. Ultimate Fighter. It was after Pride's dissolution. So, 2007. It's not one date in particular, but around that time. And UFC has really never looked back since then. And then, of course, in 2004, they got Strike Force. Sometime shortly after that, they got WEC folks. And then they brought in, various free agents during that time. And it just became so overwhelming that like what you're seeing in terms of the fan defense of the UFC's position is how they see a reflection of its strength. Because when the strength is more even or even favoring another person, another entity, and it's like not even up for debate and you can clearly tell, they don't do that anymore. They stop instantly. So to me, it's when you see it, they're not making an argument, in my opinion. I mean, listen, some people don't care. If you grew up in an MMA world where you never saw competing visions of what MMA could be or looked like, it is hard to appreciate that as like a thing to look for. If you didn't grow up seeing the value of watching, a bunch of different shows compete to have the best fights, and there were some that were obviously bigger than others. I mean, they weren't all equal, but they were still able to get value in a few different places. If you didn't grow up with that, it's not a thing that you're now in any way pining for. You don't even know what it means. And you might even look at boxing as having a number of major promoters and then having a sense that is actually a model of dysfunction rather than that's actually how guys get paid. Although it can contribute to dysfunction too, but then you find out TKO can just have the same kind of dysfunction just for other reasons. But anyway, it's a reflection of that. It's basically that the position is so entrenched and that the observers of this industry can clearly tell it is so entrenched that the attachment tends to be to that kind of thing versus somebody like it's almost like offensive to them to try and sell you an alternative vision. Now, that's not to say you have to like every alternative vision. Maybe you do like the PFL, maybe you don't. Maybe you liked what the MVP card did. Maybe you don't. There's different visions. But what you have to understand is it's very hard to make a competing vision now versus, 20 years ago. It was much easier to make a competing vision claim like, hey, we don't see MMA the same way. We see it a little bit different. This is the way we see it. And then for that to be like big time MMA with big time names, with big time fights. Again, Fedor versus Crow Cop is like, I mean, just go look at that for yourself. And if you were around at that time and then you heard them make this claim, like this is what real MMA looks like, you'd be like, yeah, fuck that UFC stuff. People used to do that. In fact, there was an argument. They used to call them Zuffa zombies because they were just, trying to make an argument about what Zuffa could be. But then this was at a time at the beginning of Pride's decline. So again, it evened out eventually. But, there used to be like a pejorative for this kind of a thing. In any case, it's not. Again, if you're somebody who just gambles a lot and what you want out of UFC is consistency, and you don't really ever grow up with a competing vision of things, and you don't even really need one for how you enjoy MMA, and you just kind of. I mean, there are people who just kind of like the UFC as it is. I think there's a lot of people who didn't experience it as it was, but certainly there are those folks who like it as it is. They don't have another frame of reference. They're not going to be open to it. But to talk about Mark Shapiro, I could not believe the temerity that he had to make that comment. And then again, people rushing to his defense because they agreed with his characterization of the show. I don't even necessarily disagree with his characterization of the show. I mean, I do a little bit. He was like, we don't think those quick finishes are good for MMA. And it's like, that's how Ronda Rousey got famous in your organization. And in Strikeforce too. It's because all the fights you could set up. Judo Jean LaBelle used to have a stopwatch. He'd go to her fights, he'd corner her, he'd have a stopwatch. Like it was part of the whole gimmick. That's how the UFC made money off of her, helped her get more famous. She, them. Like saying that now is like it's like comical, out of touch. But like, not to say that I enjoyed this fight with Gina. It didn't do much for me in the end, and I think for a lot of you, it didn't necessarily do a whole lot either. Yeah, I'm not immune to that, but it's like, once again, dude, your organization was accused in the fighter lawsuit with pretty good fucking evidence, I might add. They were accused of buying up rival promoters, not even doing due diligence on them to see if this is an asset, that is a wise financial purchase. They didn't even care. They just did it to shut it down. Like, that is textbook anti-competitive behavior. To say nothing of the freedom of movement that they restrict within the fighter contracts themselves, which if you change that, and there are entities out there trying to change that, if you change that and then the fighters just came and went, you would see high-profile fights in a different place, a different vision of what MMA could be, but they restrict that. And then they're like, yeah, the competitor's not good enough. We don't think that this is good. My guy, they are having a hard time coming up with anything because of the specific way that business has chosen to be run and is run currently. You don't get a vote. And in fact, if what you're doing is purposely making competition not really hard, but on the long term impossible. I mean, I read about this in The Age of Extraction with Tim Wu. They're not trying to beat competition, they are trying to escape it altogether. If you're trying to do that, then lecturing the competition about its substandard offering, my guy, you do see how the two are connected, yes? It's just a ludicrous thing to say, which doesn't even get to the fact that UFC wanted to do this. Gina needed an extension. They had planned to put this on. They were going to put it on pay-per-view. Gina had to lose weight, didn't do it on time. They did an extension for this fight. And then once they went from pay-per-view to non-pay-per-view, the whole thing kind of went up in smoke. And they got a better offer to go to Netflix and do it there anyway. But they had every intention of putting on this fight. They wanted it to be the last pay-per-view of the ESPN era. What are we talking about? You don't, Mark Shapiro, you don't get a vote on what is good for MMA when all the parts of MMA outside of UFC could burn and you wouldn't care. In fact, it'd be great for you if they did. You don't get a vote. You don't, first of all, you've been watching MMA for 5 minutes, number one. You've been watching for 5 fucking minutes. But beyond that, if you're architecting an effort to make the competition shitty, and then you look at the competition and say, this was a really shitty offering. My guy, the call's coming from inside the house. You don't get a vote. If the average fan watched it and said that I didn't like that card, the fights were too, there was nothing to them. They were just blowouts, blah, blah, blah. I didn't like the theater. I didn't like any part of the show. Whatever. I will listen to that 10 times out of 10. That's a fair perspective. But, creating conditions that just basically let competition rot and die. And I know you're going to be like, oh, Coker's coming back. I mean, I wish I had friends I could call upon to set their $60 million on fire. We'll get to that a little bit later. But, PFL, future very uncertain. One on those last legs. Bellator already gone. And then MVP might be something with Netflix. I guess, we'll see. I don't know. But no one even really knows who they can even have fights with, much less how good could it be. Like, this is all designed to make competition shitty. And then the guy who's doing it is like, well, I just don't think the competition's anything but shit. It's like, that's your fault, right? It's just crazy. And people being like, yeah, he's dead on. I'm like, oh my God. Do you guys, oh my God. Does anybody ever, yeah, dude, that guy who just bought this rich person beyond all imagination for anything you'll ever have, who's been watching MMA for 5 minutes. Boy, he's really got his thumb on the pulse of what's good for MMA. I totally agree. Oh my God, guys. What? Have a little self-respect. Have a little self-respect. I'm going to drink this big ass thing of pink lemonade. Someone got on me in the last show because they're like, I don't ever see you drink water, which I do, but not on this because I like to have something sweet when I broadcast, and today will be no different. All right, let's go to the next question. Let's see. Okay, here. Early predictions on the rumored soon-to-be announced matchups between Magomed versus Roundtree in July on Kalaev and Usman versus DDP. Who do you favor, why, and how? Early predictions. So I reserve the right to change my vote. I reserve the right. I would say, oh, you don't want to put this here. I would say, okay, the DDP one with Usman is interesting. I have counted him out a few times, a little too early, obviously. I think DDP might be able to make enough improvements to win. I don't know if that's going to be a 3 or a 5 round contest. Ultimately, if it's 3, I favor Usman a little bit more. If it's 5, I would favor DDP. But I think Usman has been a surprisingly there's been a surprising longevity to his success, despite the Edwards fights, for example, not going his way. And I know the Hamzat fight didn't go his way, but he got that on late notice, and he really put it on him late. So I would favor DDP to learn his lesson, I think, but that's a fun one. I actually really like that one. Ankalaev versus Roundtree. I just think Roundtree is really good for 2 rounds, and I'm not saying he collapses after that, but people are able to kind of get a beat on him after that a little bit. The better ones in the division anyway are kind of able to get a beat on him after that. And I just feel like Ankalaev, especially in a 5-round scenario, will find a way to win that one. Even if he has to make it ugly, slow it down, look for the takedown, just kind of make it a grinding, slow affair. I think he probably can do that. Yeah. All right. Luke, did you see Dana White on the Breakfast Club radio show? Yeah, of course. The host, Charlemagne the God, I really hate saying that, but he asked Dana some non-softball questions about Dana's friendship with Trump and Dana's own political views compared to what he promotes that seemed to have caught Dana off guard. Yeah, I mean, I've made this point before. Dana used to be really good at these. He used to do interviews all the time. He used to spar with media, MMA media, but not even just MMA media. He would spar with everybody. And this was like a weekly occurrence in certain cases. Or, he would do, this is the funny part about like, the UFC is so good at promoting. They are when they want to. When they want to be, they are. That's a fact. How often they want to be is more of a question, but when they do it, they are. But like, this is like one of like the dark truths to promoting that promoters don't really tell you, which is that part of promoting is, yes, a certain degree of finesse and timing and all that kind of stuff. But the other part of it is just volume. You have to do a morning radio. You have to go sit with editorial boards, or at least you did back in the day, or, streamers or whatever it calls for. Like, it's just a volume play. That's why you can hate Ronda's promotion of the fight, but she did so much of it that like, that's honestly a big part of what makes for successful promoting, just doing a shit ton. And he would just do a shit ton. He would do an absolute shit ton. Now, again, there was more to UFC promoting than that. But I just want to be clear, like, they'll make it seem to be like the whole thing is magic. Some of it is magic, but a lot of it is just grunt work. But he would do the grunt work. He would do it. And it made him, even if you didn't like his answers, he rarely encountered a question that he wasn't ready for or didn't have a strong opinion about. So it was much, much, much harder to get him pants down because he was ready. He was typically ready. But I think 2 things have happened along the way. One, you've got to know him more. And before, he was selling his bio to the media. He would tell his story as he wanted it to be told. I'm not saying it was all lies, but like, if I told your story versus you telling your story, there might be some differences along the way. And so that was part of what he did. And I'm just trying to point out, like, it sharpened him. The whole thing sharpened him. It made him ready to, like, you didn't know as much about him, so there was less of a thing you could bite into there. And then in general, he was just more ready for the other types of things. That's one, right? He just doesn't do it hardly at all anymore, and it has made him relatively weak for those scenarios compared to what he used to be anyway. I mean, I didn't think he answered all of them badly, but like, making him answer for Trump's failures. I have seen people be like, why does Dana have to answer for Trump's failures? And on some level, if you vote for a guy, you bear, however much is debatable, but you bear, as an individual citizen, you bear some responsibility for whatever that is. Vote for mayor, vote for president, vote for dog catcher, vote for city council, whatever it is. You bear some responsibility for that outcome. But that's very, very different than what Dana did, which was marshal the resources of the Ultimate Fighting Championship to glorify and whitewash a guy who had been committing crimes against the country. That's explicitly what he did. And, that is a level of sane washing that you just, like, money can't buy. Like that, you can't even buy what the UFC did for him. And so asking him to then answer for failures in that context, to me, seems actually pretty fair, right? You helped more than any individual one person, even a rich billionaire, could, by virtue of how you were able to treat this subject at this very delicate time. Yeah, you're on the hook for it. You're absolutely on the hook for it. And he's like, oh, I'm a 90s Democrat. You are not Al Gore. You are not Al Gore. Like, no. Mm-mm. Nope. No, you're not. So just an insane thing to say in that regard. The other part is doing those podcast circuits. You do a lot of jibber jabbering, but as you guys can see, it's just always on your terms for the most part. I mean, every once in a while you get someone who goes sideways with their guest, but like in general, they're just letting you say whatever you want. Hey, why did you buy this car? Or why did you make this fight? Or what's your favorite thing about this? Like it's just pitch and catch. And Charlemagne wasn't doing that. And I think I'm not, so my understanding is I talked to some people in the industry. My understanding is they had some sense that might be coming, but to me, that honestly makes it a little bit worse. They had some sense that Charlemagne might go after them, and he was still that unprepared. Damn. I'm not saying that wouldn't have happened 20 years ago, but it wouldn't have looked like that. Like, in other words, I'm not saying that like, he couldn't have been caught off guard or something, but it wouldn't have been like this was consistent. And then, talking about hitting his wife and shit like that, like he went after him. So, yeah. Saw your video on the political channel. Thank you for not letting the Republican voters off the hook for that Kentucky vote against Massey. Yeah, buddy. They dumped $20 million in there to get a handpicked candidate plucked from basically obscurity, picked by the ruling class to be in charge of rural Kentucky, essentially. Isn't that funny? Yeah, that party is dominated by the interests of Israel. I mean, you could argue both parties are, and that's true, but it is so much like, and especially where everything is headed, where the base of the Democratic Party is like aggressively anti-Israel, certainly relative to the Republican base. And you just look at like who's buying congressmen, in which party is this happening, and whose president is serving their needs, and then which party is getting out of the way for him to be able to service those needs. Just one answer to that question. Just one answer. You can get elected on the left taking a moral position on Gaza. You can lose your career doing that on the right. At least electorally, maybe not so much as a media figure, although there's that too. But in any case, I mean, I would not make an absolute endorsement of Massey as such. I think more often than not, he would probably vote in a way I did not like. And everyone's like, oh, it's because of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. Do you guys think we're all... Who is so stupid that they believe that? Yes, I understand that he was the only one in the Republican side who voted against it, but it didn't really matter. They didn't need his vote. It's really not what did anything to it. And you can make what you want of his criticisms. It is quite obviously because he partnered with Ro Khanna to get the discharge position go through, to get the Epstein files released. It is quite obviously that, and being anti-war as well. It is quite obviously. And 35 million total, but then 19 or 20 million specifically on him from the billionaires, and they got him out. Who does that party belong to? Whose interests do they serve? Do you think Israel cares about the people in that district having their needs met? They don't care about any of that. They just care about what they need for Massey to not be there. And if you guys suffer because this guy sucks at the job, tough shit. And they voted for him anyway. Now, people might say, oh, well, Trump endorsed the other guy, and it wasn't enough of an endorsement to get him to go through. And that's true. It was not enough of like by itself. What's the power of the endorsement? They had to put a bunch of money into it. That is true. So people are like, oh, well, Trump's power over the party is waning. I'm like, I mean, it's true that the endorsement itself was not enough, but the fact that they were able to just muscle it no matter what is, to me, not a great sign. Yeah. What do you think about MVP making fake stats for JDS last weekend during his fight? They falsely claimed that he had the most knockouts in UFC, and they also included his pre-UFC knockouts in that stat. Well, okay, you're going to laugh at me for saying this. I'm not to defend it, because I'm not. Like, if you get it wrong, you get it wrong. However, you would be shocked at how often I have worked on broadcasts where, like, I show up, okay, and it could be for anything. It's commonly you see it here, where maybe you're doing a preview show, maybe you're call-in fights, that whatever, and they put up a tail of the tape. Okay, you'll look at the tail of the tape, and they'll have something like, I'll make something up. Ilya Topuria, known heavyweight, born in 1976. He's got 13 knockouts, but he's got 9 wins via triangle. You're like, who the fuck put this together? It is so common. I cannot possibly tell you. The people who make the graphics, for whatever reason, inside of sports television, never seem to talk to the researchers who work maybe on the production side. They're like siloed off from one another. And as a consequence, you get shit like that all the time. All the time. And that's happened on some of the bigger broadcasts I've worked on. And I've never worked on anything Netflix big. Okay, fair enough. That's bigger than anything I've done. But I've done, something ballpark-ish compared to that. I did, Spence Crawford and stuff like that. I didn't call the fights, but I'm saying I did programming around it where that was relevant. And it happens all the time. It happens all the time. So honestly, you might be asking, well, okay, where are you, like, is it possible that they may have done that to juice the stats? Of course. It's entirely possible. However, I cannot overstate this. I'm not kidding. If it's not every broadcast I've ever done where there was something wrong with the tail of the tape or some kind of stats collection or bio collection, then it's every other one. It is so frequent as to be mind-blowing. So, unfortunately, there's a plausible answer for this that doesn't necessarily include MVP intentionally juicing the stats. They could have told somebody, some like intern, hey, we need you to make the stats. And they're looking on Tapology and, they don't know what they're reading, or they misread it, or they don't know what's UFC or not because they're not paying attention. And they just put all the knockouts in there. So who knows? Who knows? That happens all the time. All the time. Do you have any insider info on why Colby retired, left the UFC? I do not. I've not talked to anybody about it. Is it your opinion that it had to do with the White House card snub? Well, sort of. As I understand it anyway. You have to remember, he wins the interim title, okay? He wins it, and they want him to turn around very quickly. I think it was to fight Woodley at that time. And he couldn't do it because he had to get nasal surgery. I don't know if you guys remember that. And so they may have stripped him from that one or something like that. But he brings that up repeatedly as a thing that is like a point of contention for him. I don't think he's necessarily seen eye to eye with UFC for some time. How bad it was the whole time, or were there periods that were more like were worse than others? I don't really know. But it's not necessarily new. What I do think is true is that he might have some money saved or some businesses elsewhere, or, he's got brand deals or some kind of stream of income. Maybe this RAF thing, they really want to plan around him. I don't, this is a possibility, and that they keep offering him fights in UFC and he doesn't like any of them. He doesn't want, like, they may be giving him fights that are like ones he would never want in a million years. And he might be just saying, you know what? Fuck this. I'm done. And then just go do other shit. I think he'll come back because they all seem to kind of come back. But the straw that broke the camel's back was clearly the White House card. I mean, it changed his whole persona. He changed his whole persona to use that to get ahead by his own admission. He gets ahead to a degree. I don't think it quite goes how he planned, but he did, for the most part, well. And I think he expected that this kind of advocacy, and not only just advocacy, but just sort of publicly as the MAGA guy, would get him some kind of reward, particularly when there was this union between the White House and the UFC so explicitly, and he didn't get it. And I think it wounded him. To the point where he was like, why am I even doing this anymore? He stopped. He was like, I'm still... Like, I think he says he still might like Trump or whatever, but like being the face of MAGA as a fighter within the UFC, and I know it's like, oh, you might pick other fighters who would be a more authentic representation. But again, he was wearing the hat. He was reading Don Jr.'s book at play. It was performative. He had the suit that had the back of the suit was Trump's mugshot. You guys remember this? He wore that to like a press day or some shit. He literally wore the identity, and to not get selected for the card, I think, wounded him big time. And then the fact that he may have had some long-standing grievances with the UFC just kind of made him. And then all these, and then maybe RAF or other opportunities are opening, and he was just like, you know what? What am I doing this for? You know, I can understand that to an extent anyway. Yes. Let's get to this. I have a lot of thoughts on this. Y'all must have forgot. Scott Coker single-handedly built the entire women's movement into martial arts. You are out of your mind. No, he did not. Also developed Strikeforce from the ground up into a true juggernaut. That Dana had to buy them out in order not compete with them. Scott Coker's champions: Gilbert Melendez, Daniel Cormier, Luke Rockhold, Jacare, Ronda Rousey, Yoel Romero, Bigfoot Silva, Misha Tate, Nick Diaz in his most badass prime, and even Fedor. Okay, you are giving credit to him for a lot of people he does not deserve credit for. In part, well, so many of these. However, he did find a lot of Bay Area talent. That is true. Okay. What do we make of this? Did you guys see this news? Scott Coker has a new promotion. Or it's not out yet. It's not supposed to debut until 2027. We don't know much about it other than a couple of things. We know that he has raised thus far $60 million. And we know that he has partnered with a lot of people who either have a lot of money, are, proven, relatively proven anyway, successful venture capitalists, people involved previously in MMA, in the broadcasting side, like Kevin Kay. I know Kevin, or at least I knew Kevin. I haven't talked to him in a long time. But Kevin was the one who hired me to do, he was the president of Spike TV. So that's how I got on MMA Uncensored Live. He ultimately had to sign off on that, and which I'm still quite grateful for. But in any case, he's involved. I think the owner of DC United is chipping in on this. Tony Hawk is chipping in on this. And then, there's a series of names of people who've been involved in broadcasting as well, combat sports broadcasting beyond Kevin Kay. So there's just like a lot of venture capitalists, a lot of television people, some MMA people, and, some celebrity force in there as well. It's an interesting group of people. We don't know much other than it's supposed to be like a global MMA league, but what does that mean? Are they using the word league literally? Are they using it more in the way that some people might just call UFC a league, even though it is not technically a league? I don't know. I don't know. Your guess is certainly as good as mine. I'm trying to be charitable about this, and think of like the scenarios where I think this would make sense. But I'll just say this: if I had $60 million, and I don't, but if I had $60 million, this might be the last place I'd put my money into. Now, there are some potential realities here where maybe things could work. Number one, we live in an age of sports organizations just bilking taxpayers. And UFC does this a lot. TKO does this a lot, but they're not the only ones. Lots of places do this now, where you might see it expressed through site fees. We're going to wait for a tourism board to pay us to go there rather than just taking our show there where somebody might be from, or we're not necessarily getting a huge site fee. But, this is, using government largesse to supplement your bottom line. TKO has done a really masterful job at it, but they're not the only ones doing it. Maybe they feel pretty good about their chances to do something like that. You'll remember Scott Coker was kind of one of the first people to do really old man fighting on a bigger scale with Bellator. They did Chael versus Fedor and shit like that. So maybe he feels like in the streaming era, that might do better than it would in, other eras. I don't know how true that is, but perhaps he might think that. There's also this ongoing Phil Davis lawsuit where Davis is not asking for any money compensation from the lawsuit itself. What he is asking for is injunctive relief, a change to UFC's contracts to limit them in length to 2 or at max 3 years. And as I've discussed, if there is any one change you could make to the industry that would be genuinely revolutionary, it would be that. If all contracts were 2 years, you would see rotation of elite talent in a lot of different directions. And that would be enormously transformative for the fortunes of the fighters as well as for the promoters. And whether it's for the fans is certainly up for debate. It would depend on how it looked, but there's at least a plausible interpretation where it could. So maybe they're anticipating that there will be change. Or maybe it's going to be something closer to like regional MMA than it is, elite MMA. I don't know how much of a market there is for that. Like how many people are going to watch, like how many people watch LFA or how many people watch, any kind of regional promoter. Some do okay, but these are generally not widely watched broadcasts. These are, very niche and for understandable reasons. So with all of that, there might be an interpretation possible that over the long term, they feel good about the future of Davis's lawsuit, although a lot of what Davis ties his argument to is, in fact, some of the provisions of what's enumerated in the Ali Act, which, if they get changed, undercuts Davis's lawsuit. So I don't know if that's actually an animating feature of what they're doing. I don't know. But listen, I don't have high expectations for this. I'll remain, I won't say neutral per se. I'll remain let's see what they can do kind of an attitude. But like most of the evidence out there, and again, I think UFC is going to have a strong summer. They're going to have a strong White House card. They're going to have a strong July card, assuming that Conor stays on it. And then if Islam fights in August, that'll be a big fight too. They're going to have a really good summer, I think, in general. It's not like the sky is falling in every way, but MMA, the evidence appears to suggest that MMA is contracting. Okay, the evidence appears to suggest that. Trying to dump money into an entity that is contracting while the dominant firm's control of the industry is at a historic level does not seem like a wise investment to me. I of all the times to get into MMA, and again, this could depend on how things go. If the Davis lawsuit is successful, if they try to do AAA, I mean, it can go a few ways. But in general, this is like one of the worst times to get into it. And I've seen people be like, I'm really bullish on combat sports. Oh, you must be new here. I've seen what it's like when shit is like breaking records month over month. We're not doing that. I mean, I know they broke it on Netflix. They had the biggest streamer, but even then they just barely met their own expectations. And even that is some of like a little bit of fudging along the way. It's not a great time. And you might say, oh, well, there's fan demand for an alternative vision. First of all, I challenge that theory, and like in terms of there being a big demand for a different vision. I do think there is some. But I think what most people want is just a UFC to just kind of like pick up the workload a little bit, not so much that another entity comes along and challenges the vision. Those are two different things. There might be fatigue with the way the UFC is doing things. That is not necessarily the same thing as saying that they're opening it up to an alternative vision of things. Again, assuming that's what they might be trying to do, which maybe they're not. But I just think that they're misreading the market terribly. If I had $60 million, I absolutely would not put one penny. I don't know how you can look at $500 million in the hole and PFL, which has to be at least 300 million in the hole, and think that the problem is we just haven't figured out the right format yet. It is kind of funny to me. I have made this point to people, and I know that when I make it, sometimes I make a point and people really, really agree. Sometimes I make it and they really disagree. And then I can make a point and I can tell it's just going in one ear and out the other, what they're not even processing the truth claim, but it sounds so unusual to them that they can't really absorb it. And it's this one. This is what I mean when I say competition to the UFC is not possible. You can have an off night here or a one-off night there, and that's true. Like, they can't dominate every part of the calendar. Like, nobody can, neither can they. Fair enough. And they don't cover every part of the business. They cover most of the most lucrative parts, but not every part. So there are some windows of opportunity here, but they cannot be competed with. And the reason is very simple. The public views a certain set of fighters as the ones that are having legitimacy. These typically tend to be, over the course of the history of fight sports, champions, not exclusively, but champions that they recognize. And in that particular case, the public widely recognizes the UFC's guys are the ones that are having legitimacy. The only way for another entity to gain legitimacy is not to do it in absentia of what's happening in the UFC or outside of it. It's to have cross-pollination. Your guys have to fight their guys. But the UFC doesn't do that. And so, absent any ability to get cross-pollination, it is essentially impossible for your roster to develop any kind of meaningful audience and to gain public legitimacy. It cannot be done. And I know when I make this argument, they're like, yeah, of course it can be done. Well, why hasn't it been done? Why hasn't it been done? IFL was, I think, over $100 million burned up. Elite XC, tens of millions of dollars burned up. They got rid of Bellator at Viacom/Paramount. And they got rid of their whole division. I know they brought it back for UFC, but they didn't bring it back for boxing either, by the way. That's been the whole thing. They pushed it all off of there. Like, what are we talking about here? Why it's just there's like it's a very the timing is strange, yes, but the legitimacy argument as well. It's like, again, maybe they're planning to do AAA style stuff, but even then I'm like, how big is the audience for that? I don't know how big the audience is for that. And maybe they're not trying to get a big audience. Maybe they're just trying to develop a league and it finds some way to, as I mentioned before, they can do site fees and other ways of making the product cheap and blah, blah, blah. Maybe that's it. But I just hope everyone understands, like, MMA, the evidence primarily suggests it is contracting. How far that it goes, I don't know. It's not uniform either. But you can't get legitimacy unless the UFC decides you can get legitimacy. And if you can't get that, you're building a bridge to nowhere. I'm going to say it one more time. Do you people really believe that the only people who can successfully promote fights are a bunch of like middle-aged dudes in Las Vegas? And when I say a bunch, I mean like 5. They're the only ones who can figure this out. They're the only ones. We've seen multiple people promote big fights in boxing, but somehow this is more complex than nuclear fission or fusion. That's what this is. The best minds in the world can't figure it out. I've just already explained this to you. A huge part of promoting is just grunt work. There is some magic too, and they've got it. I'm not saying that they don't. They're not the only ones. A lot of people can promote other fights, but if you don't have the roster that the public is ever going to recognize as the most legitimate one, there's never a way to build that. You're building a bridge to nothing. And that's why the PFL is in debt. That's why ONE is in debt. That's why Bellator went out in debt. And look at the rest of the wreckage that has been there. It cannot be done. It literally cannot be done. And then, last but not least, Scott Coker is not a person I have a high degree of faith in. I'll put it that way. I thought he did a very good job with Strikeforce in general. And certainly he's been in the game a long time. Do people not remember the job that he was doing at Bellator at the end there? It seemed like the laziest, most unimaginative thought process I'd ever seen. People who used to work there, I've spoken to them, and they all feel the same. They hated the effort he put in, and they did not respect it, nor do I. But whoever the guy was that was promoting for Strikeforce, that guy was not there at Bellator. And I can't believe that people have memory hold this. He's not good at it anymore. Now, I admit this is a nice group that he's assembled. They seem like movers and shakers. So kudos. That's a nice start for sure. But if anything, the end of the Bellator run left me with a vote of no confidence on his abilities. Also, if I may, I don't respect Scott as a person at all. Scott Coker took Bellator to Israel, I think 3 times. And I think by the second time of that, this was pre-pandemic, I think 2018-ish, he takes them to Israel. They have guys doing photo shoots with Benjamin Netanyahu. These are all over the internet, by the way. You can find them. Google Bellator and Benjamin Netanyahu. You'll see it. I raised a question at the time being like, is it really a good idea to take these events to an apartheid country? This fucking guy lashes out at me. Like, he's like, you should go cover politics. Good idea, Scott. Good idea, actually. That's maybe the one good idea you've had in a long time. And then on top of it, he gets people that we know in the industry to call me to lecture me about it. They didn't threaten me, but it wasn't the kind of phone call that was, you know, we would like to see more of this. I would like to say I won that argument. I won that argument. I won that argument, Scott, hands fucking down. I won that one as cleanly as you can win it. That was your Jose Aldo and I'm McGregor. I won that one in 13 seconds. Turns out you shouldn't have been there and you should never have taken your company there. And you had your brand paraded by a guy who's now wanted as a war criminal by the ICC. So I think I won that argument. And also, when he was doing a bad job at Bellator, he would call my bosses to get mad about what I was saying about him. And then I would have to hear about it. To which I would say, do a better job. Do a better job. Yeah. So given the leadership that's there, now again, the larger leadership group that's there, these guys can do a lot. And I don't know what their plan is. Could go a few different directions. They've got a good start with money. They might get more. But I do not have confidence in Scott Coker. I do not respect him at all. And I think it's a very, 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 very strange time, given what we've seen, to be putting tens of millions of dollars into this. Now, the only thing I will say that I do think is a uniquely good thing, or I should say unquestionably good thing, is more money for fighters. More places for fighters to go. I think that's a great thing. I think that is great. Like, they're going to put on shows. Awesome. Great. But like, I've seen people be like, oh, this is a thing to get excited about. I'm like, I'll take a wait and see approach on that one. What improvement to the 205 division do you think Whitaker and possibly even Izzy, were he to move up? His coach implied that that might be the move if he is to continue fighting, would make. Not much. Not much. Along with Costa, who already had success moving up. And there's also Hamzat stating to Dana he wants to move to 205, although I think he rolled that back. Do you think those former middleweights can breathe some sort of life and excitement back into the division? And do you see any of them having success atop the division? No, not really. I think they're far too old to really change their fortunes. They're both champions, bro. I mean, they're great fighters. But, I mean, I think Izzy has really been affected. And honestly, Whitaker has too. Now, this Krylov fight is interesting. Again, that one, maybe he can win that one, but like, can he get to like the top of the division? I do agree that for the right kind of candidate, going from middleweight to light heavy, or light heavy, and especially going to heavy, for the right candidate, I do think that can be transformative. But for guys at closer to the end of the run than they're beginning, much closer anyway, I don't know. I don't really believe that there's no. I'd be very surprised if they fought for a title. And I'd be very surprised if they were able to put a 3-fight win streak. Nah, depends who they get matched up with. 3 ranked opponents in a row, I'd be surprised by. Yeah, I'd be surprised by that. Mm-hmm. Luke, I keep hearing other experts say the fighter payouts reported by MVP are lower than what they truly are. Yes, that's true. But I thought MVP was motivated by higher pay for fighters. Those are not exclusive. Guys, there's many reasons why. Okay, so for example, everyone complains about UFC contracts, but they're not the worst ones. Like, there's a case to be made that if you look at one contracts, they might be a little bit more burdensome. Actually, they might be a lot more burdensome than UFC contracts, for example. So it's not like, oh, they've got like the worst of everything. That's not the argument. The argument is that they might be bad enough, but what they're affecting is the most important, and therefore it carries a different degree of significance. But like, why would they want to keep it hidden? Very good reason. The question is, like, how much did they spend on the whole event, and then how much of that was fighters, or you can look at it the other way too, which was how much money did they make, and then what portion of that went to the fighters. From my understanding, it's going to be well above 50%. But why might they want to keep that number a little bit secret? On the one hand, yeah, they could release the full figures and be like, hey, look how much we're paying. But they're going to use this as negotiation leverage for the next entity, so that they don't, like, if I actually don't know what this is. I'm just going to, I'm going to make something up. Ronda made 10 million to fight Gina. Again, it could be more, it could be less. I genuinely don't know. But if I put it out there that it was 10 million, then the next time I try to get a headliner, even if you can't get the 10, that 10 serves as a reference point for negotiation. So it's just a way for them to not necessarily like, hey, ordinarily we'd pay 50 and now we're down to 20, but it might be a way to like curtail some of the excesses of what might be demanded from them, knowing fighters are going to be like, hey, there may not be many of these. We're going to try and loot these fucking guys as long as they're around. And yes, that's an underhanded promoter trick. Like, this is why fighter pay in its totality should be reported. But the difference is that the UFC has been audited. The UFC has had to turn in everything under court order. So again, I made this argument with Brian Campbell. Unless you think they are in defiance of a court order, they've turned in all of their finances. And it's because of that on the back end that we can then see, aha, these don't match these extraordinary revenues. Also, did MVP even make any money on that show? I mean, I don't know what Netflix paid them. I'm sure it was a handsome sum, but like, that was probably a very costly show. Did they make money on it? And the difference is UFC makes a gigantic amount of money. The UFC makes more money than any other promoter in the history of combat sports. They make more than most of them, I think nearly all of them anyway, combined. So it's not the same demands on them, but in the unique way. Although I do recognize, like, are they trying to? Is this a promoter trick to protect their bank account in some kind of way? Sure. But I think that I'd be very surprised. I mean, they only made 2.2 million on the gate. That's not a bad gate, but that's not like a, that barely covers anything of your costs. So they would have to make up a lot of territory in a lot of other places to make that profitable. And again, they had a higher floor as well at 40,000. So from what I hear, it was pretty big, well in excess of what the UFC was offering. But I do recognize that, like, UFC might use these tricks. They're not the only ones. They're not the only ones. All right. If Gable, talking about Gable Steveson, I believe here, is to have one more fight at heavyweight after LFW, you mean IFW? Do you think it would be more beneficial or more risky to put him in with a wrestler like Curtis? No. He needs to be brought up slowly. Part of me thinks it would favor him, as Curtis is a wrestler, but not to the level of Gable, obviously. But then also, it could be that he's just good enough at wrestling and to stuff Gable's takedowns and employ a sprawl and brawl approach. It's just interesting because when UFC was trying to manage the matchups versus guys like Poatan and O'Malley, they gave them mostly strikers on the way up. That's right. As striking being their primary discipline. I wonder if that logic applies in trying to manage matchups for an up-and-coming wrestler. Do you give him opponents of the same background or the exact opposite? You give him the ones that he is likely to win. This is a development project. This is, to me, no different than Raul Rosas. Maybe a little bit different because he comes from a higher pedigree. He's also older. But like, it's very similar to that. Okay, I'll walk it back. It's similar to that. And I think at its core, it's essentially the same kind of thing. It's a development project. Yeah, it's a development project. So with that being the case, you have to give them, I mean, you can't give a striker a wrestler, so you give a striker a striker. But I wouldn't give him a wrestler either, because then they kind of duke it out on the feet. If I was building up a wrestler, I would also give him a striker. And I would just give him an increasingly better one over time until eventually, you either have to give him a wrestler or you're giving him guys so good it doesn't even necessarily matter. They got, you're at the deep end of a division or something. but you don't have to cancel it out in that way. Do you think the UFC plans on being more diligent around cutting some of their heavyweights to limit options for Francis? Tai Tuivasa literally should be cut with his recent performances and a 7-fight losing skid. Excuse me. Is it 7 or 6? I can't remember anymore. Francis would probably destroy him, but it is still a good name to market. Do you think the UFC plans on being more diligent around cutting some of their heavyweights to limit options for Francis? I hadn't thought about that. That's actually a good point. They might be. They might be. Because Tuivasa is terrible, but he's got a bit of a name. Martin Boudet is actually, he's not great, but he's better than Tai, but they let him rock, Maybe. I hadn't thought about that, but honestly, I can't. It's hard to pinpoint exactly how explanatory that is, but on some level, yeah, it could be. Yeah, it could be. Again, I don't know, but we'll see. It's interesting. Again, people asking about Coker. Okay. Is Jon signing an 8-fight deal at the age of 35 the worst business decision a fighter has made in the history of MMA? His current contract predicament was quite predictable. Not sure why his management let him go through with it. Yeah, buddy. Jesus. Okay. All right. Let's talk about this. So, first of all, Tyron Woodley's lawyer is Sam Spira. I don't know how to pronounce his last name. I've talked to Sam many times over the years. I used to be friends with one of his underlings who went on to go be a lawyer, but at a time between undergrad and grad, or maybe he was during law school. I can't quite remember. Who used to watch MMA, who now is a lawyer in LA. And he was whip smart too. He is, I believe, one of the guys who helped architect the idea for how Conor could get the Mayweather fight. And certainly, look at my eye. You guys see my eye? See that? See it pulsing? Crazy, right? And I know that he has spent a considerable amount of time thinking about how someone could potentially challenge a UFC contract. I don't know what that mechanism is, but he at least has some ideas about it. So I want to respect that there might be people who've really kind of thought this through and no one's tried it yet, but it actually might be more doable. I mean, it wouldn't be easy in any case, but it might be more doable than someone imagines. So I kind of have to put that out there a little bit. But I just don't get it. I don't get it at all. I talked to Mike Bond today. I didn't know this because, they make this announcement that Conor McGregor is back. And I was like, okay, all right, he's back. He's going to fight in July. It's going to be a big fight. We all agree. But what happened with his contract? You're not on pay-per-view anymore. And this guy is the pay-per-view king, basically, certainly in MMA anyway. And he had 2 fights left on his deal. So where are we now? They didn't make any announcement about that. They didn't make an announcement about him having a new deal. So I asked Mike Bond about this. This was an on-the-record conversation, and what Mike tells me is that his understanding is that Conor agreed to this fight, and that part of the agreement is that his next fight also has to happen by the end of the year, and did not sign a new deal. So, ladies and gentlemen, I think we might be coming to the end of Conor McGregor's run in UFC. Because whatever you want to say about Nate Diaz and how bad he looked against Mike, and he did not look great. But if Conor gets free, Netflix is going to throw an ass load of money at that fight. And you know that, and I know that. They're going to throw an absolute ass load of money at it. So my question is, why couldn't Jon have signed a deal like that? He had, I think, 1 or 2 fights left, and they extended him out 8. Why couldn't he do that? I don't know. I mean, if you're Poatan and you're like, I'm for sure going to be done after this and I'm never going to turn on UFC because, they did a lot for Poatan in a way that a promoter doesn't necessarily have to. I can sort of understand that. I still think that doesn't make sense, but in that context, I can kind of look the other way, But in Jon's case, it was just pure lack of imagination about what life would be like in 2 or 3 years. That's what that is. Total lack of imagination. I don't think he gets paid poorly for those UFC fights, but he doesn't want any of them. So what difference does it make how much he gets paid? Conor is thinking ahead, it turns out, and is making contractual demands that honor that. All right. With that in mind, it's time now for the paid questions. But first, before we get to that, y'all already know what time it is. These donks are taking care of me, and they're definitely going to take care of you as well. You know who I'm talking about. Oh, yes. Our friends at The Perfect Gene. Boys and girls, let's give a nod to the sponsor, The Perfect Gene. To be honest, I've never tried these before. They sent them to me. They sent me some samples ahead of this deal, and they get an enthusiastic endorsement for me. Let me tell you, you donks know I'm big. Big legs. Not surprisingly, finding jeans off the rack or ordering online can be a little bit hard for me. But The Perfect Gene, well, they solve that problem. They just fit. They just work. It's just great. They stretch where I need them to. They're super comfortable. And even the wife told me she likes the way I look in them. They have waists from 26 to 52, lengths from 26 to 38, and fits from skinny to thick, including athletic, which is the one that guys like me should take a look at. All right. So here's the deal. You donks are going to get 15% off your first order plus free shipping at, as you can see it on the screen here, I'm going to read it to you, theperfectgene.nyc, or Google The Perfect Gene, and then use the code LukeLive15 for 15% off. Again, that's LUKELIVE 15 for 15% off. And again, listeners, 15% off their first order plus free shipping. Big thanks to our friends at The Perfect Gene. All right. Godzilla came home. Abuela got her. All right. Let's do this. Bill Maher is getting the Mark Twain Award at the Trump Kennedy Center. My gut tells me there'll be an available ticket if you want to go. I'd rather get fucked to death by an 8-dicked walrus. Bill Maher is a rancid, racist piece of shit. I cannot stand the fucking guy. Oh, he's so awful. All right, Amosov is such a great addition to the UFC roster, but I'd like to see Nemkov in the UFC next. Not sure about heavyweight, but I personally think he could easily become the light heavyweight champion. I agree with you. I mean, Nemkov is tied to Fedor, and I think because of that, they might not ever go with UFC. I mean, I think that bridge is just permanently burned. I could be wrong. I would love to be wrong. That'd be great. But I have a feeling that might be burned. But you're right. I think if he were to sign with them, it would be a huge, huge deal. Huge deal. Justin says, did you see Trump might not attend Don Jr.'s wedding? I did. He literally, in that clip, when it's an interview or it's a press event, but in that Q&A with the reporter, he literally describes his son as a person I've known a while. He's like, who I've known a while. I'm like, you mean your son? Okay. I mean, in fairness, I wouldn't go to Don Jr.'s wedding either, but all right. Luke, rumor is the reason the Iran war hasn't escalated again is because Trump doesn't interfere. Wait. Okay, hold on. Luke, rumor is the reason the Iran war hasn't escalated again is because Trump doesn't want interfering with the White House card. Once it's over, it's all systems go. People might think that this is some kind of strange hyperbole, and I seriously doubt it. That would be, I'm not declaring to you that is the reason, but honestly, for the optics of it all, it wouldn't surprise me even a little bit. Wouldn't surprise me even a little bit. I mean, can you imagine if we resumed hostilities? And I mean, I cannot believe that oil prices haven't caught up with how long the Strait of Hormuz has been closed. I mean, eventually that time bomb is going to go off. But for now, it's so well, we've been also emptying our strategic petroleum reserves. But I mean, the optics would be really, really, really bad. But honestly, I'm not. The other counter to that theory is like, dude, he's literally trying to set up a nearly $2 billion slush fund in open public so he can never be. Dude, he can literally cheat on his taxes, not even pay them, and there'll be no real way for the IRS or the federal government to do anything about it ever. Cannot be audited. Cannot be nothing. They can't look into it at all. He's doing that in broad daylight. I mean, this is not hyperbole, and I know this is going to like kill some of the chuds in the chat. By the way, you can also always, at all times, you can also just go get the chud free chat over on Substack. But like, this is not even debatable based on the scale of this. Dude, these fucking guys are just straight up looting the country. They're straight up fucking balaclava on, kicking the door down and just smashing and grabbing whatever they can. And part of that is the way in which they've manipulated, prediction markets. Part of that is the way in which they've used the Trump business to do deals internationally for favoritism politically, which the New York Times documented in great detail particularly with Abu Dhabi, the UAE. It's also the crypto scams that they've been running and the other series of coins that are part of it. It's Don Jr.'s venture capital fund going from $200 million in 1 year to a valuation of over $3 billion because of all the government contracts, no bid, that they've been awarded. They're just fucking stealing everything in broad daylight. They have such contempt for the taxpayer and frankly for the architecture and the meaning of government. I mean, to understand something, this is an impeachable offense in every sense of the word. He should be impeached and prosecuted for it. The lawyers who crafted this arrangement should be disbarred. And in fact, the acting attorney general, Todd Blanche, he should be disbarred. This is straight up a criminal enterprise conspiracy. That is what this is. Straight up crimes. So like, on the one hand, I might be able to recognize the optics for UFC would be weird if the Iran hostilities resume and then they're trying to have an event in the White House long. On the other hand, they're just straight up robbing us in broad daylight. Donald Trump is the most corrupt U.S. president, not even by a little bit, by a significant margin. You've never seen an attempt to loot the federal treasury in this kind of way ever. Ever. It's never happened like this. Not even close. Not even close. He's the most corrupt by far. So, how much does a guy like that really care about the optics? Maybe a lot. I don't know. Ooh, hold on. There. You may not agree with Massey on very much at all. I have two screens here. I'm trying to toggle at all, but can you at least respect that he is principled and stands for what he believes in and won't be bought and paid for? Certainly. Absolutely. No question about it. I have great respect. The guy paid for his, this is what it means. Like, again, I'm not going to make an absolute endorsement of Massey, but to the question you're asking, I will make an endorsement of that. This is what it means to actually live your values. Do you see it? This is not a world that wants you to do that. Not the powerful don't. They want you to just be morally fluid. Maybe you have your principles. Maybe you stick to them most of the time. Maybe when the heat gets hot, though, you don't. But you still kind of hold them, and you just hold this sort of compartmentalized morality. And then there are people like Thomas Massey that are like, no, these are my principles. I'm going to vote on them. And if it means that my political career comes to an end, then that's what it means, because it's important to uphold the values that you say power your life and your existence and your worldview. And he did that. He did that. He partnered with a Democrat to get the half of the Epstein files essentially released because he felt that was important. He voted against the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, I think that's what they called it, the OBBBA. Yes. He voted against it because he he had his reasons for it. Essentially, the thought it essentially did too much is the way I would describe the nature of his pushback. And there's some other things as well, like speaking out against Israel and the Iran war and what all of that meant, and Israel's influence over our government, and he paid for it. He paid for it. That's what it means to live your values, and this is why so many people do not. Because it turns out that if you want to do that, there's a cost to pay for that. I've never experienced anything like Thomas Massey, but I made the choice to basically take a more adversarial approach, knowing full well this was going to lock me out of an enormous amount of opportunity. Well, enormous amount is a little strong word, but a lot of opportunity. And I'm not here to say, I'm some martyr. That's not my point. But I'm just saying, like, if you want to, whoever you are in your line of work, in your daily life, if you want to live your values, that means you're going to get sideways with powerful people, or relatively powerful people in your particular orbit, or some kind of common cause that is bad and is bankrupt. You're going to pay for it. And I think good people will bake into the decisions that they make, not just taking on these powered interests, but then a guy like Thomas Massey, he's got some other kind of plan for the future. I don't think he's going to go away completely, although he might, who knows, maybe he wants to have a quieter private life. We'll see. But they bake these decisions into their calculus, and then they accept them when they come. I have a lot of respect for that. I have an enormous amount of respect for that. Yeah. Big Luke, have you ever read Say Nothing by Patrick Radden Keefe? It's a fascinating true story about the troubles in Northern Ireland through the lens of those forced to live under an occupation. I have not, but I would love to read a great book about the troubles. If this is this like one of the better ones? I don't know enough about the troubles to comment intelligently. I would love to read a great book like that. I would love to. I appreciate the recommendation. Dana White was red-faced screaming, "This is karma," at Donald J. Trump's victory speech, but wonders why we just can't all get along. P.S. Rogan's 6 words to Luke post podcast. Why do people think I'm MAGA? No, it was not that. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Like, Dana did a real softball interview. This is why the White House event is going to be big. I can tell, because political media is going to cover it. So if it's just MMA media, it won't be very big. If it's MMA media plus sports media, it'll be big for like I make something up, Connor fight, right? But if it's MMA media and sports media and political media covering it, it's going to be really, really big. And that's what you're getting with this. So like, this card is going to be, I can't make a prediction on numbers. I don't know, but whatever they anticipate it being big, whatever the measurement is for them, I suspect that it will hit that. It'll be big. The reason I bring all of this up is that the guy, as I've said this before, like, if you see Dana do these interviews, he did one with Steve Inskeep of NPR. Like, they're real softball interviews, and he comes across, because there's nothing adversarial asked of him, he comes across, I think, relatively reasonable or something. And I think this is going to help boost the viewership for the event. I think the thing I would say is, like, dude, these people think you're stupid. They think you're stupid. They do. They think you're an idiot. And the reason why is because they offer each other things that are basically things you can't buy. Donald Trump, after January 6th, and then after the 34 felonies, and then after all the Jack Smith indictments, and then going to these UFC events, and then laundering his reputation in all the ways that they did, right? You can't buy that if you're Donald Trump. There's no way. That's why another candidate couldn't get it anywhere in any other rival league. You can't go buy that. That's a very, very, very special level of treatment you're able to get from that. And that's why he kept going back, because it was very effective, right? Conversely, on the back end, the White House is pushing through this legislation to get the Ali Act changed. They're going to have this event on the White House lawn to say whatever else might come their way, in terms of benefit from the federal government being on their side. Okay. All of this exchange happens. And then they want to tell you that, like, you know, it's not political and we should all be able to get along. It's like you partnered with an extremist political project. Again, this is the most corrupt president in the history of this country. This is the guy. You're living through it. I've never heard this rhetoric about, and dude, Obama was hated. They didn't talk about him like this. Dude, George W. fucking Bush was hated, and they don't talk about him like this. George W. Bush was despised, and they don't talk about him like this. This is the guy. He is an extremist in every possible sense. And then they want to come to you and be like, well, we should be able to put this aside. No, we cannot. No, we cannot. Not going to happen. It is impossible to do that. This guy is looting the treasury. This guy is setting the world on fire. He's destroying energy markets. He is destroying the fabric of this country by going insanely overboard on a zealous satanic panic through immigration. They're destroying clean water standards. They're destroying they're letting them use cyanide bombs to kill off wildlife, and on down the list. They're setting everything on fire. There is no, we got to come together on this. There is no choice for this political project that they helped elevate other than defeat. Other than defeat. That is the only acceptable one. To stamp them out like a lit cigarette. That is the only thing that this political project deserves. The next administration should do everything in their power to claw all this money back and prosecute everyone involved in it. That is it. There is no way you can partner with the chief vandal of American democracy. Cannot be done. To say nothing of how bad he is at the job, which all of you guys already know, even the chuds, y'all know too. Y'all know too, because you're hearing it from me, you're hearing it from the Groypers, you're hearing it from centrists, you're hearing it from everybody. You know it's true. Partnership is not possible. And they think that you're just gonna he's just gonna say that and all of a sudden, oh yeah, we should just be chill about this. No. This movement needs to be brought to its knees and eliminated. There needs to be a demoggification that the country undergoes after this. Period. The most extreme political project of my life. Which coincidentally, aside from being the most malevolent, is also the most incompetent. That's the magic of the Trump administration. It's where incompetence meets malevolence. No, there is no partnership. And there will never, ever, ever. This is not Mitt Romney, and we're trying to figure out if school lunches should be universal or means tested. It's not what this is. This is the biggest vandal of American democracy, certainly in my life. And well, I can't say ever because they wanted to have a civil war, but since World War II, easily, and the most corrupt ever. There's no one that even comes close to the amount of money this fucking guy has stolen. Ross, welcome to the party. Is Conor Max 2 the first rematch to be set 2 weight classes up? That's a good question. Also, if Saladin Parnasse was set to join UFC, who would you choose as his debut? Someone in the top 15. I'm not sure who'd be 11-5, but a hooker or something like that, so somewhere in that range. Is this the first one with the rematches is 2 weight classes up? That's a great question. I don't know off the top of my head, but I think so. I can't think of another one off the top of my head where the guys rematch up a weight class. Yes. Up 2 in MMA? I don't think so. Oznazim, welcome to the party. Have you seen the trailer for the South Korean sci-fi movie Hope? I have not. Looks sick, LTGP, MK all day. I have not. I did see a good Japanese movie the other day. I saw Cure. Oh my God, bro. They don't make detective thrillers like this anymore. Jesus. This movie is awesome. Yeah, I was on Fandango at home, and they have sections like action, documentary, kids and family, romance, whatever. And then one of them was the Criterion Collection, like the list of like a really, really good movies. That's the simplest way to explain that. And they don't have all the movies in the Criterion Collection, but they got a bunch of them. And one of them was this Japanese movie, Cure. Holy shit, bro. It's dark. It's dark, but it's really, really good. Amazingly good. Thoughts on Cuba and DJT/DOJ indicting Raul Castro? I mean, Trump double taps a girls' school. They've been killing fishermen in the Caribbean all this time. I mean, I'm sure they've killed some drug traffickers, but we don't know. We know for a fact they've killed a bunch of fishermen, well over 100 at this point as well. And this fucking guy is worried about what Raul Castro is doing. Get the fuck out of here. Who thinks this? You know what I really believe? I think they're doing this blockade of them. They obviously want to topple the government, but I think the timing on it is not. I was like, why are they doing this in the middle of the Iran thing? I think they're trying to get a lick back. I think they're trying to make it look like there's still some might. We still have some pull, particularly hemispherically. We have Dominion, the Don Roe doctrine. It's an easy win. Like that's what Trump loves, easy wins. Venezuela getting Maduro was a kind of an easy win. I think it's what he's looking for. I mean, I don't know how easy this will ultimately prove to be, but given the humiliation it's inevitable, right? You either have to have more conflict with Iran or you have to accept some level of humiliation because they hold most of the cards, basically. So what are you going to do? Oh, just go and, Don Roe doctrine up Cuba. Despite being the guy, they're indicting Raul. I'm not saying Raul Castro was some great guy, but like Trump has like committed mass murder. I mean, what are we talking about? There's a lot of people that are a threat to global security. I would put Trump ahead of Raul Castro on that list. Luke, have you ever felt less patriotic paying your taxes than this year? I haven't thought of it that way. A taxpayer-backed slush fund for Jan 6ers seems like a bad incentive structure and precedent to set before the midterms. And not just a taxpayer-backed slush fund. Some of these guys are asking for millions. I saw one Jan 6er is asking for $30 million. Generational wealth. Generational wealth. So they go and these fucking morons who know nothing about how the world works at all. They go down there and they believe the stupidest man to ever hold office, which is Donald Trump. They believe his stupid lies. He nearly gets his vice president killed. They take over the Capitol. They eventually get leave. Finally, they get prosecuted, which should have happened, but it took too long anyway. Then they get pardoned, and now they're going to be enriched because this was lawfare. Get the fuck out of there. We didn't punish these losers and traitors enough. And that includes Trump himself. I can accept that the conditions in the DC jail as a general matter should be improved, but none of those people cared until they had to suffer under it. All the other people, all the poor black people that had to live in there, they don't care about them. Oh, it was never a problem until they had to get in there. And I agree it's a problem. Happy to have improved prison standards across the board. I'm okay with that. But let the record show this was not a problem that they ever really had to speak about until it literally affected them, even though there have been complaints ongoing for some time. These motherfuckers are criminals, thugs, thieves, and bastards, one and all. And they deserve to be prosecuted, and they deserve to be bankrupted for what they did, or at a bare minimum, serve time. I have zero sympathy. Oh, the sentencing was too harsh. Go fuck yourself. It wasn't harsh enough. And for Trump himself, this is just insane. They're going to pay these guys generational fucking wealth. If this doesn't make your blood boil, you're dead inside. This is what I mean. You can't argue with these people. They just have to be defeated, stamped out like a lit cigarette. Luke, please read my email. H Salama, Viva Palestina. Okay, I will take a look at it. I've been a busy day, but I'll take a look at it. Brendan says, you were brought up on breaking points about appearing on the show before the UFC White House. They both said yes, and Crystal said you were very intelligent and thoughtful, and Sagar was surprised you were a lefty in the MMA space. Yeah, me too. Yeah, we'll see. I hope to get on there. We'll see. I've been talking to some people, so we'll see. Nothing's confirmed yet. We'll see how it goes. Luke, do you have a list of books you're considering next for personal reading with the book club? I'll have a book announcement out tomorrow on the Substack. Look, have you seen the level of fighter skill peak as it seems with the general pack of incentives and potential reductions in fighter pay that a decline in skills only seems inevitable? Yes and no. I have seen best practices continue to improve, but based on certain divisions, the quality of the athlete's ability to live up to that standard has fallen. So like when people are like, well, fighting's better than ever. Well, in certain ways, that can actually be quite true. You can get guys like Ilia Topuria or, whoever. Pick somebody who's at the front of the game who is still relatively young too. These guys are very, very talented. The ladies too. They're very, very skilled. But the average athlete's ability to carry out the demands, I think, to me, has kind of fallen off. We did this one already. Do you think this slush fund is the singular most corrupt thing Trump has done, or am I missing something? I mean, it's hard to say if it's the singular most, but I know he buys stocks and pumps them using the bully. What other stuff can you think of? I mean, I didn't even get to the insider trading he did. 3,700 trades for a volume of potentially up to $750 million while in office. Even Obama put everything in a trust. So did George H.W. Bush. Carter had to put his peanut farm in one. Even those fuckers, who I don't have high opinions of. He's just looting. Just straight up stealing. I will say this, in terms of the legal analysis I've read of this, I have never heard any lawyers more condemnatory about Trump than this. This is the thing I've heard them say, that this is openly criminal. This is openly stealing from, again, one more time, he sues himself. Do you guys remember how his tax returns got leaked? They happened when he was president the first time. And it wasn't the IRS who leaked them. It was a contractor who, by the way, who put that contractor in jail? Do you guys remember? It was the Biden DOJ. They put him in jail. The guy Little John. They gave him a 5-year sentence, the max. So Biden's DOJ put that fucking guy in jail. Trump sues himself because he was president when it leaked. And he didn't even have standing because the IRS was not the one who leaked it. Basically, the judge realizes this is a total sham and it was going to rule that way. So before he does, he withdraws the lawsuit and then reaches this sort of phony settlement, but it's not even a court-approved settlement outside of it that basically the acting attorney general is acting in the president's like personal capacity to then just fucking loot the treasury and never be able to be audited, investigated, basically convicted of any crime related to tax evasion or theft. They're just fucking stealing. They're just stealing. If it's not the biggest, although it's pretty bad, it is by far the most brazen. I've never seen anything like it. It's just theft in the open air. They didn't even bother to hide it. I've never seen that. That's new. Pulverizer, welcome back to the party. When guys like Strickland say, JK, I was just pretending to be a complete POS, where does that leave fans who liked him because they felt represented? I don't think that they listen to the latter part. There is ideological symmetry, and so they like that material as humor. They're not listening to it ironically. So when he does that, they might treat that ironically, but they're still attached to the worldview itself. Luke, love you, man. I'm out here, Trug, while we're doing skits and bits, Trug walking, dropping in to say hi. Thank you. I appreciate that. It's not exclusive to the UFC. I mean, so many WWE fans pray for AEW's demise since it started 7 years ago. Yeah, there's a lot of like, just whoever is the strongest presence in that market, the consumer response tends to be to rally around them. Luke, did you ever have a conversation with Colby when he wasn't in character? Yes, I talked to him on the phone a couple times. Yeah. He seemed like very friendly. Very, he seemed reasonable. I'll say that. Yeah. LT, thanks for the book club chat. It was awesome. Great. Already ordered the physical copy and downloaded the audio book of How to Sell a Genocide. I truly appreciate the book club and your Substack. Yes, we're going to read this book next. Here, I'll take this off the screen. I haven't announced. Well, you know what? Well, I guess I did announce it to my Substack, but I didn't make a post about it yet. How to Sell a Genocide, Adam Johnson. We're going to read this one next. Should be interesting. LT, I have a boss nearing the cartoonishly evil side of the GOP, but he and I have civil discussions regularly. Do you think I'm safe, or should I expect to lose my job at some point? If you feel like they're safe, then they're probably, your gut is probably correct. However, just that stuff can be weaponized against you if you guys ever go sideways with one another. Keep that in mind. Luke, I started watching the Evan Tanner doc on YouTube. How good was he in his prime? Very good. Looks like he had about a 90% finish rate or so. He was not the best fighter, and a lot of times, like the Phil Baroni fight, he was able to win on just pure heart and guts. But he was very athletic. He was very good. But, when Rich Franklin came around, it was just, and even David Loazo, these guys were like way ahead of him. So, it just wouldn't work. He wasn't the very best, though he did become champion. But like for the way in which he lived his life, he was surprisingly quite good. Look, you said the 17 seconds was unsatisfying, but I remember with Jake Tyson, you saying it sucked because Jake didn't try to get him out of there. I prefer Ronda ending it fast and drawing it out. It's not that I hated it that it was 17 seconds as such. It's that Gina, so I made this point before. If you look at so she had two fights of similar length, Alexis Davis and Kat Zingano. But in the Alexis Davis was 16-5 heading into that one with her record. It was a jiu-jitsu black belt. She gets hit with this dynamic head and arm throw where Ronda crashes on top of her into scarf hold and then just pounds her out into unconsciousness. It was fucking dogged. It was awesome, right? And then you look at the Kat Zingano one where she gets tackled. She has to land on her head, pivot like 180, come down, and then catch the far side hip in order to be able to stop her, and then put the arm behind her and then sat back for the arm bar. Like it was a very, very dynamic way of finishing. This was interesting and like cool. Dude, she just took her down with a double leg, passed him out, and then just a couple punches and then got the arm bar. This is like MMA 101, dude. And there was nothing. Ronda didn't need considerable skill to do that. You know what I mean? I'm not sure who couldn't do that, honestly. That was like child's play. And I know Ronda's really, really good for the ground anyway. But the problem wasn't that it ended fast. It was that it ended fast because Gina there was nothing. There was nothing there. Whereas she had to be a little acrobatic against both Davis and Zingano. Why do you think the Fox News wing of the Republican Party, largest segment, by the way, and people like Bill Maher are so dismissive about bigotry towards all groups except Jewish people? Because they're hypocrites. There is bigotry towards Jewish people, but there's bigotry towards a lot of people. They just have a compartmentalized morality. Simple as that. And also, like, who comprises their movement? I think that, I don't know what the proportion of Jewish folks is to black folks in the Republican side of things, but in terms of prominent leadership roles or visible stewards of the brand, so to speak, I just don't feel like there's a lot of representation in the Republican Party for. I cannot speak for the interest of black people, but I'm just trying to articulate, does this seem like a party that seems focused on their issues? And you could say, what about the Democrats too? Fine, but we're starting with the Republicans. It doesn't seem like them either, but they seem very, very fixated on what they see as combating anti-Semitism on campus or not, in the workplace, about promoting the interests of Israel. Like there's just a lot more influence within that party for a particular set of concerns. Any updated plans for UFC White House coverage on Fight Week? Stay tuned. Is BC reunion? I don't think BC's coming. I don't know for sure, but I don't know if he's coming. Watch along with Long Island Luke. He might be coming, so we'll see about that. We're working on some stuff. Stay tuned. We are. I'm having Othello will back this up. At this point, is it okay keeping personal relationships and friendships who you disagree with politically, or are you at the complete opposite spectrum? I can be friends with anyone depending on the context. But it would really depend on the context. Civil for family, I could understand. A longtime friend, up to a point, I could understand. But And, you know, making room for people who change their mind too. I think that's also very important. But, you know, just like straight up somebody who's like, oh, I think, you know, Trump looting the treasury is great. Yeah, I mean, go fuck yourself, you know. The Nakba started the war, right? I don't know what that means. I mean, I know what the Nakba is, but like, what are you referring to? I'm a fan of Arman. There has been way too many instances of him being a loose cannon. I certainly agree. Have your thoughts changed about him deserving a title shot? No. No, dude, they give fucking, I mean, they didn't give title shots. Like, he'll make it to fight night, you know, control him at the weigh-ins, but like, you can't tell me that they did all of that for Sean and Hamzat and they can't do something for Arman. Like, it's not really a real argument. I don't deny that he's a fucking loose cannon. He is. But you can't be like, oh, we're going to have so much security that we're going to have, like, literally, we're going to promote this fight on racism and Islamophobia. Like, straight up, unequivocally, we're going to do that. And then we're going to get security to protect him. And then you can't do it for one fucking guy? Come on. That's not a real argument. MK all day. Thank you, Saul. I think for MVP MMA 2, they should do Francis versus Despain on Netflix. So Netflix gets involved, and then have Parnasse versus Paul Hughes as the other main event, PFL involved, and then Moraes versus Pumi too. These would be great, but you can't headline with Francis versus Robelis. I like these fights, but not that you would need something else. What's the best steakhouse you've ever been? Also, what would be your last meal if you could pick anything regardless of price? I don't know. Pad Thai or some shit. I would nothing extravagant. Best steakhouse. I mean, I've been to Peter Luger's. Sparks. I've been to Sparks too. I went to one here, Matt. It was really expensive, but it was I got to go for free. But it was really good. What was it called? Like either Mastro or Mestro, not Maestro. It was like it was one of the two. It's here in DC. It was in downtown. It was real fucking good. Probably one of those, I guess. What do you think of Dan Carlin? I don't have a strong opinion. Aljo's a former champ with a 3-1 record at featherweight. Only loss was a close fight to the number one guy. He shouldn't be the next one for the title, but his next fight should be for the title. Do you agree? Yes. Yes, I could be very much down with that. I could be down with the idea that he shouldn't get it next, but if he's patient, he should be in line for something special. Yes. Any news on Anshul Jubilee's title run? It's not going great. Luke, no luck scoring tickets for Terminator 2 anniversary. Use the money for the T2 game on Steam instead. And it's a great throwback love letter to the film. I got tickets. Taking the wife on Sunday. Hell yeah. What are the implications of Trump-Israel war on Massey? Tucker says GOP's dead. I think that's a little strong. The right under 65 may be undergoing a political awakening against Zionism, endless war, and data centers. There's no question that like this brand the Republican Party. So MAGA is definitely going to die one way or another. As soon as Trump goes, it's going to the factionalism is going to be way too strong, and it won't hold. It's already fraying. You know, once he goes or something or whatever, it will fracture completely. But then there's a Republican Party. He has hollowed it out to make it a Trump boosting organization as such. And if you do that and then he goes, the entire thing kind of hollows out. Now I think they'll find a way to resurrect it or, you know, reshape it in whoever comes next image. But for sure, MAGA is going to collapse. Now, I'm not saying like tomorrow or the day after, but the only thing holding that together is his heartbeat. That's it. Appreciate you. Thank you for what you do. Thank you, sir. I appreciate you. Checking in from Dublin before returning home to the DMV. Have you been before? No. If so, no, I have nothing else to say. Guinness Storehouse, Book of Kells, Manos Arriba Barbas. I've not been. I definitely need to go. If DDP beats Sean a third time, is he a Hall of Famer? Well, that's a weird one. Maybe. I don't know. Sean doing it against all odds is a little different, but I recognize if you beat the guy who beat the other guy. I mean, this is why Sean's his success is a little hard to quantify because it's so big in certain ways, but it's also not like a lights out ability. He can be beaten. And beaten by guys who the math doesn't work, I don't know. Maybe that's my inclination is to say no, but I don't know if that's fair. Maybe it's too long for a message. Is that okay? Take it up with Othello. Could you see a genuine politically relevant left-right coalition formed between Ro Khanna and Massey? No. Where do you see it going? I don't. Ron Paul and Ralph Nader attempted this in 2008. No, I don't think it can work at all. What I do think is that individual pieces of legislation, individual efforts might be able to form this kind of a coalition. But as any kind of movement, no. In other words, they can rally around certain different pieces of policy when possible, but nothing more than that. If I'm making a Lego model of the MK gang at this point, who should be sat with you? Initial idea was BC was around, but was going to put the rest of the gang in a separate room. I leave that up to your artistic discretion. I would love to see it, though. That'd be cool. Also, would you prefer it as a fan sub and then sent to you assembled, or just send it to the PO box? I definitely would want it as a fan. I would take whatever you would be willing to give. I'll put it that way. Favorite food from your motherland, India? Someone asked this before. It's a good question. I mean, I don't know, like a good tandoori chicken, like cooked the right way, is pretty fucking money. I like all kinds of curries. I don't know if I have a favorite, to be honest with you. The only thing I can say is there's a place nearby that makes like this garlic naan. That is ridiculous. True or false? Bellator PFL 1 and MVP will not be around in 10 years. True. Canelo fights Jake Paul in 2027 sometime. I'll say true as well. Rousey Home 2 happens in the next year. False. Poatan becomes a 3-division champ. I'm going to say false, but we shall see. The Gull hillbillies fall for the same shtick every time. The next obnoxious douche that flouts nationalism and religion will immediately grab their attention. Well, there's a certain kind of magic that Trump has, but yes, I do agree that they seem to be affected by those forces. Luke, is there any way possible for Connor or John to get out of their contracts? Again, what has been articulated to me is that people have thought about it, but they have not shared with me the mechanisms that they think would make that happen. So I'm just trying to relay to you that there are people who have ideas about this. I have not heard them yet. Luke, MTG is all over CNN. Do you see a way forward for her to return to run for the Democrats? Fuck no. No, brother. No, that's not going to happen. I think that she might help splinter off a wing of the right, but no, she'll never get elected. No, that'll never happen. Luke Schaub said Jake Paul beats Nate Diaz or Mike Perry, no doubt, in an MMA fight. Do you agree? I mean, Mike Perry, I don't know if they slugged it out. Maybe. I was surprised he was so confident in that statement. I don't know, man. I don't know. Like, it's like if they were to take him down or do jiu-jitsu with him, yeah, he's going to fall apart pretty quick, right? But if they slugged it out with him, 4-ounce gloves, like, why is him winning that so hard to believe? I don't think that's that crazy. I'd have to think about exactly how much they might mix it up with him because he's such a novice. Would they clinch up with him more easily? And, obviously Nate is going to have more difficulty clinching up with Perry than he is with Paul. So maybe I would probably pick, there's good reasons to maybe pick Diaz and Perry, but I think at a bare minimum, it'd be close. I'd say that. Did you see Ariel compare Jewish people that don't like what's going on in Israel to Americans that don't like Trump? I guess I didn't. I did see a bunch of shit. I didn't see that. Also said he's hated for being Jewish. Well, if you look at his mentions, I mean, here's the thing. I don't think the sum total of the reason why people might have some difficulty with him is a result of being Jewish. But if you just read his mentions, it is pretty clear that one of the things that is animating people against him quite clearly is anti-Semitism. I mean, you can say, well, that's not the reason why I or you or whoever or whatever. Yeah, okay, there might be other issues you have, and maybe that's all fair game. But like, it's also pretty clear that part of what's pushing the weight of that, part of it, is visible anti-Semitism. Visible. Like, you can't be blind to it. Is that the sum total of the reasons? No. And anytime, like, obviously he's got a bigger audience than me, but like anytime you're in the public eye, like there's a lot of fuckers who hate me too. And you have to recognize, like, I was asking my shrink about this and she's like, what do you make of their criticisms? And I went through different examples of things I had seen and heard and which ones were more painful and which ones weren't. And, most of them were, they're mean, but like they don't have an effect. In fact, the ones that I told her like that bother me the most are not the ones that are true criticisms, although you have to make room for that. It's the ones that when they make up shit that you've never ever said and then ask you to like answer for that. That's actually the one that bothers me the most because it's so frustrating. People being mean doesn't mean anything. But like the point I make is like she was like, do they ever say anything true? Yes. Sometimes they know you better than you know yourself. You have to be aware of that too. And unless you're used to seeing that, it can be hard. I would also say that the amount of people coming after him, like how visible the anti-Semitism is around him, might be warping his perspective. Like, because he's just seeing so much of that shit all the time that it might just be like, well, it's just got to be, what else could it be? I'm not saying that is true. I'm just saying like I could understand like there might be some reasons why he would point that out. What was the other part of the question? Compare Jewish people that don't like what's going on in Israel to Americans that don't like Trump. I mean, those sound like people of conscience to me. I think Jewish people who don't like what's going on in Israel are clearly bothered by it. And I think that speaks to their moral conscience. And also just the wreckage that's happening as a consequence of living that way and recognizing that this is not a way to live. I don't know how he meant it because I actually didn't see. What was the other part? Yeah, I don't know how he meant it, but I mean, to me, that almost sounds like a compliment. Trump won twice. If he's incompetent, what does that make Democrats? Also incompetent. Yeah, even worse. You DSA folk are so insufferable. I'm not a member of the Democratic Socialists. The Democratic Party is more unpopular than Trump. That is also true. Yeah, I don't know if you're new to this show, but I kill them too. They are deeply ineffectual. And they've got a reckoning coming. I think they've got a reckoning coming with the primary base, who are furious with them. Yeah, I don't have much to say in defense of them. But like, here's what I'll say for Trump. Like, how does he get elected? He got elected because if you watch him in like 2015, he was clearly more with it then. Like, he's experienced an enormous amount of decline. But he has changed rapidly. His views have all changed. He started out talking about self-financing. He didn't need Israeli money and blah, blah, blah. He could just do everything. And that all completely changed. But the real thing that he got that made him work was that he recognized a gap in the market. He recognized that there was a gap between the GOP leadership and then the base itself. And he recognized what those frustrations were. And then he made himself the avatar for the deliverance on those frustrations. He had good political instincts at that time. And that was enough to propel him. But how can anybody with half a brain look at the job he is doing and conclude that he is a competent steward of the government's interests? You have to be mentally deficient to think that. And I'm not saying that about you. I know it's hard to override partisan differences, but like, look at the state of the economy, such that the economy is growing at all. It's being eaten up by inflation on all the wage gains. The tariff effort totally backfired. There was a report that came out from the University of Pennsylvania last week on the deportations. We now know in all of the areas in which they have undergone it, it has damaged all the businesses visibly in that area. And what they also found, there was no corresponding increase in online sales. So people don't want to show up to these stores anymore. Maybe they would just buy more online. No, it decreased commerce overall to those individual territories. So that's not going well. There's no evidence whatsoever that any of our housing issues, any wage issues, anything is related to any relief from that has ever been made from this deportation panic. Hasn't worked at all. Okay. Need I say more about what's happening in Iran? A complete and total betrayal of everything he once stood for. And that's not me saying that. That's mostly other Republicans saying that. He is all through those Epstein files. And I know that some people are using that to make these grand assessments of who he is. I would say at a bare minimum, more investigation is needed, and they drag their feet on this. And in fact, we don't even have the rest of what's left there. Okay. He has utterly failed in that regard. Prices on meat have hit a record high this week. Ground beef hit the highest it's ever hit. Gas, need I say more? And by the way, there's no relief in sight whatsoever for any of this. There are regional hospitals are closing. The subsidies for expanding healthcare access have gone away. They partnered with billionaires who are interested in pushing Israeli interests to get rid of a sitting congressman in Kentucky. Like, what part of this is working for you? What part of this materially is changing things for you? What part of this is improving the stature of the United States? Every time I talk to someone who travels internationally, they can't believe how empty international arrivals are because tourism has collapsed. To say nothing of how our own allies now wish to distance themselves and decouple from us. Only an incompetent steward could have this many L's back to back to back to back in this short an amount of time. To say nothing of how much of a betrayal of the principles and the things they said they'd be about. To say nothing of we were going to be an alternative to the failures of the Democrats. They didn't do anything. They've only made it worse. You can call me whatever you like. You can say I'm DSA even though I'm not DSA. And you can say the Democrats are bad, and I'll agree with you. They are. They're really fucking bad. They're terrible. Their brand sucks for a very good reason. They deserve it. They deserve it. But it doesn't make Donald Trump competent. Every time he speaks, he sounds like a shit for brains mental patient. His speech is slurring, by the way, more regularly than ever. Did you see him at these commencement addresses he gave at the service academies over the weekend? He's incompetent. Badly. And we are at the mercy of that, you and I. You're not in there with him. You're in there with me. We are in this together against him. And the more people realize that, the better off we'll be. And the sooner they realize that, the better off we'll be. And then you can go back if the right can get their shit together and put a candidate in office who's not so incredibly shit for brains sundowning, you can go right back to riding whatever they're pushing. But I don't think any observer can honestly look at the job he's done and the state he's in and conclude this is an effective steward of the government. He's an effective thief of the Treasury. Luke, do you have any advice on how to advocate or make a difference for someone who lives in a rural conservative city? I don't know what the effort would be for something like that. In a municipal area, it's a little bit different, or like a suburb. I could imagine some civic organizations or various other initiatives to get involved in. When we start talking about rural America, you're asking me to comment on something that, I was an Eagle Scout in the Boy Scouts. This is true. And for my Eagle Scout project in the town of, it was just north of Nashville, Georgia. Was it Tifton? God, it's been so long. It was 5th grade. No, this was 7th grade when I did this. So it's been a while. I put the blue Alapaha. That was where I did it. Alapaha, Georgia. So it's a Native American name. Alapaha, Georgia. I'm the one that put the, if you drive by a street and there's like a blue, I don't know how the laws are anymore, but in the 90s, this is how it was. There'd be a blue reflector in the middle of the street that would tell you where the nearest fire hydrant was, and they didn't even have that. So some of their fire department had difficulty locating, pinpointing exactly where the hydrants were in the event of a fire. And so there was like more than 30 of them in the city. And I went through for my Eagle Scout project, and we made reflectors throughout the entire city for them. So like I've got some experience in parts of the country like this, but really not much to speak about. So I don't know that I have any wisdom to impart, unfortunately. How does Max against CMG in terms of physicality? Well, it's at 170. I think he'll be out physicaled in tie-up scenarios. I would imagine Connor's going to punch harder, right? Will he be overwhelmed? That's kind of a different question. I don't know how to answer that one. That one's a little tougher. I think Max will be okay. But I would say that it would be wise to expect Conor to have the physical advantages. Yeah. For more Troubles history, watch Hunger, 2008, an unbelievable story about, well, Irish hunger strike hero Bobby Sands. 66 days without food, died in 1981, age 27. Damn. That's crazy. Thank you for the recommendation. Around the world, many times. Thank you, sir. What up, LT? Hope you've been good, bro. You watch CoffeeZilla. I do time to time. Ever consider a collab? He's too big for me. Been a fan of his journalism over the years. Yeah, I mean, a lot of times, like, hey, it'd be great if you went on this show. I'm like, these guys are much bigger than me. I got to get my name value up a little higher. How does Hamzat having a BJJ head coach impact him? It might give him a keen sense of awareness for different types of attacks that he might not know from the traditional martial arts background that he has, just little windows, little differences, different ways to think about things. It could be quite impactful, but he's not going to revolutionize a game. On last week's MK, I heard you mention Whitechapel. Check out Spite's album, Dedication to Flesh. It goes hard. Who is it? Spite. Think you'd dig it. All right, I'll take a look at that. Luke, whose dad likes them more, yours or Don Jr.? My dad went to my wedding. my dad went to my wedding. He wore tennis shoes, but he went. Perhaps alarmist. Do you think Trump is using the funds from the IRS to build his own militia? He's already got that. He's already got a paramilitary force. His own private army of loyalists to steal the presidency. Also, is it possible we may need to wage a war with Israel? What do you believe? I don't think we need to wage a war with Israel. I think we need to cut ties and sanction them. They are a rogue nation, and our interests need to be decoupled from theirs, but I don't think we have to wage war with them. Who is interested in more war? I don't know who that would be. He already has a paramilitary force. This is what ICE showed themselves to be in places like LA and Minnesota and others. He's already got a paramilitary force. What are you asking? He's using the funds from the IRS to build his own militia. No, he's using it to reward cronies. Again, this is what he does. He rewards political favors. That's why the UFC is getting a White House thing. It's what he does, right? This is what he does. So in any event, it's very transactional for him. In any event, he's already got that one. The question is, like, to what extent is he building some kind of bunker within the White House establishment itself? And I don't know what the answer to that is, but I think that the guy already tried to steal an election multiple different ways. Fake elector scheme, which is not even up for debate. Telling the state of Georgia to just find votes, which is why he was going to be prosecuted there, although all of it has gone up in smoke. Because that's what re-election was keeping him out of jail. To say nothing of the documents case and everything else, like he pressured the Michigan legislature and other places. He tried multiple different avenues to steal it. He's going to try and steal every election he's on the ballot for as long as he's alive. Whether he'll be successful, I don't know. Is he going to try and steal every part of it? No, but at the margins in different places, yes. He's going to try. What's the best predictor of future behavior? It's past. And he tried to steal an election. How do we come back as a country after Trump? I just feel like this shit will be permanently broken. The only way is like demagafication. That's it. And if we don't do that, then we are finished. If this guy isn't prosecuted at some point and all of his lieutenants aren't prosecuted at some point, we are finished. This is why not prosecuting the folks involved in the 2008 crash was a big deal. Not prosecuting the people behind the Iraq war was a big deal. We have now gotten to the point where we don't prosecute any elites for any misconduct, for any illegal behavior, nothing. We don't do anything. And it just gets worse and worse. There's no coming back from this if we don't prosecute it. Simple as that. Magic Wand, what change are you making to the Constitution? I would get rid of the Senate. That's a big question. Say nothing is apparently a fantastic read. Oh, say nothing is apparently a fantastic read, but misses a lot. The Baffler has a good review. I recommend Making Sense of the Troubles. What change am I making to the Constitution? Probably some kind of anti-gerrymandering one. I don't know if y'all are ready for a conversation about the Second Amendment as well. I might change that, but that's a different conversation. Can we talk about SNL helping Trump win in 2016? Yeah, they did a little bit of their own help. They also helped humanize him and also provoked sympathy from undecided base. They sure did. All of these late night talk shows he's gone on, now they're fired. Yeah, I know people are like, oh, this is going to be sad when Colbert's off the air. He shouldn't have been fired because Trump didn't like him, but I don't give a fuck. Same with Jimmy Fallon. Oh, it'll be real sad if Jimmy Fallon gets off the air. No, it won't. He's terrible. Fuck him. Why do you think folks hate Ariel so much? Well, I'm not sure exactly what I would say about how much hatred there is. If we're talking the past week, I think it was because, you guys have asked me before, like, hey, can you do that job? Can you be both an objective journalist and can you do that job? And the thing is, I said before, like, it's not that I think he's not telling the truth. It's just that if you didn't have those views, you wouldn't work on those broadcasts. And I really have to say, like, if you watch what he said in here, listen, I wasn't sure how I felt about it, but then after watching this, I do feel about it. I don't think you can do both. I personally don't think you can do both. Because it's true, he wasn't, if you actually listen to him carefully, he wasn't blowing up MVP, but he is blowing up Netflix, and that by itself is its own kind of conflict of interest. Not the biggest one, not the end of the world. But, and again, I'm guilty of all of this, by the way. This is not me being like, well, let me explain to you how this goes. That's not what this is. This is a guy who, on a smaller level, but has done something, pretty similar to this. A smaller level, but, a similar one. And I didn't think much of it at the time either. And again, I was like all gung-ho about Showtime's mission. So like it never really occurred to me. But even if you're just on the network side, first of all, the interest between the network and the promoter, they become blurred and indistinguishable at a certain point. And then that's one problem. And then the other problem is, of course, you do have to hype up the network's interest or the broadcaster's interest. And he did. And again, that's the part of the job. And that doesn't really bother me per se. But I think that like the reality is if you want to call balls and strikes, even if you're not working for the promoter, if the promoter's interests are directly aligned with the streamers, then this is, I'm not going to say a difference without a distinction, but I'm going to say for me personally, I just don't think it can be done. And I say that as someone who, again, I did it. So this is, I hope everyone understands. I'm not trying to lecture for something for a crime I've committed. But having reflected on it and now some time away and then seeing it in the hands of other places, it does seem to me that it's just very, very difficult to do both. It's just, there's an inherent contradiction between them. And I think a lot of people have, I think he pissed people off about the apology take. And then, there was this whole thing about how he they didn't do him any favors. They put him on air a lot, but like trying to do like a 10-minute post-fight interview is just going to piss everybody off. Like you can get your favorite person in the world to do a 10-minute interview post-fight and everyone's going to be like, bro, wrap it the fuck up. That's just an inevitability. And then before that, people, people have accused him of instigating forever, to which you can make your own judgment call about. But in general, I think I've definitely, after that experience, I feel like, yeah, you can try your best. I tried my best, and I'm sure he is as well. But there is an inherent contradiction between them. And I think if, for me, I do the XFC stuff, which is, it's just regional. It feels very, very divorced. But maybe that's enough of a contradiction too, I'm not sure. Othello, what's going to happen if Gable doesn't have what's going to happen if Gable doesn't have a perfect run and loses a couple times after his debut? What's the state of heavyweight MMA without him being a star? You're looking at it. It wouldn't be much different than it is now. We're hoping he can add to it. If he can't, we're just kind of left with what's left. What makes the Korean Zombie so captivating to foreign MMA fans? Everyone, including Dana, loves him. Sadly, here in Korea, he isn't quite as famous as he is in the U.S., despite his incredible career. The name is interesting. His style was interesting. It all just kind of worked as like a fun identity. Again, we talk about guys who just never win titles. I know he fought for a title. He was good enough to fight for a title and didn't win it. But he had the most fan-friendly style. And the Korean Zombie was such a fucking cool nickname. And he had such a cool way of fighting. And he had a quiet demeanor, but then he fought like a honey badger. It just all made for like a really delightful guy to get to watch. And he either lived by the sword or he died by it. He lived that shit. It just made it, there's something about like coalescing around a certain identity. It wasn't just his Korean identity, and it wasn't just his fighting style. It was sort of like a combination, and the nickname. It all kind of worked together more than the sum of its parts. And I don't know if like that it resonated. I mean, the fact that he was kind of foreign made him a little bit mysterious is a strong word, but something like that. Did you see that video of pro-Palestinian people asking Ariel questions, and he was like, nah, bro, I'm part of the chosen people? He said that? He said, I'm part of the chosen people? I did not. Is that real? I don't know. I mean, I don't know what that's all about. Yeah, I don't know what that's all about. I've actually not seen that. Not if that's what he said. I didn't see any video where he did that. No. I must have missed something. Shit. Y'all are bitter at this fucking guy. Majority of Israel's population are Jewish people who lived as minorities under Islamic rule. Being non-Muslim in a Muslim state is like being black in Jim Crow U.S. That can be true. There are some Jews, for example, in Iran that they kind of enjoy, they're allowed to live, but they enjoy a secondary status. Although the U.S. government, I don't know if you all saw this, they bombed some synagogues in Iran intentionally, which is great. But the reality is you can be Christian in Israel, particularly if you're a Palestinian. They've not murdered thousands of Christians, but destroyed Christian churches, including ones that have been there for, hundreds of years. Heritage sites, essentially. They've attacked churches. You know what I mean? They've done everything possible to undermine Christianity, in the occupied territories, whatever the difference might be in Israel proper. They've gone after it as well. It's not like it's some kind of paradise to live under them either, to say nothing of being Muslim in some of those places. But you would think, oh, maybe they'll be nicer to the Christians, and they're not. It's like, this is what I mean. It's like everything they make accusations about in the wider Islamic world or the Middle East world, or the Middle East, that this might be true. I mean, again, and I know for a fact it's true in many, many cases. I'm not blind to the idea that they can have unfair treatment in other places. They do the same shit. Oh, in Israel proper, it's not quite as bad. Israel society, first of all, has radicalized to a strong degree. And it doesn't matter. You're in charge of millions of people between these two entities who you've never given any rights to. You're talking about Jim Crow. You want to go see Jim Crow? Go to Hebron. Go to the West Bank. You'll see plenty of it there. That's just straight up Jim Crow as it gets in modern day society. Like, they can say that these things about these other countries might be true. They might be really bad. But again, there's not the Moroccan equivalent of AIPAC unseating congressmen and pulling us into wars. There's not the Egyptian equivalent of AIPAC doing that same kind of a thing. I can understand that there might be just brutal treatment in 1,000 different directions in all of these places, but it's the connection to this particular one, and then that putting us on the hook for it, that makes it a lot more different to me. Last thing, any thoughts on Max Kellerman saying bringing in James Harden to win a championship is like electing Donald Trump to fix your country while working for TKO, who elected Trump? There's people who work in UFC leadership who don't like Trump. That wouldn't surprise me. And maybe Max is that way. Although, I don't know. I mean, I've heard a lot of stuff about what Max really believes and how much of it may or may not match what he says publicly. So you can decide, how much of all this is an act. I don't know. What I would say is it doesn't matter. Like Dana being like, yeah, I'm an 80s, 90s Democrat. First of all, no, you're not. And second of all, it doesn't matter, bro. If you do what he did, these special set of resources to return to power this kind of political project, you are on the hook for it. You are on the hook for it. And he is. He's on the hook for it. And as this disaster, which is only, oh my God, people, we haven't even gotten started, honestly. When this disaster continues to come apart, make sure you know who's on the hook for it, because it's important to say. All right. That's it for me. I'm done. Thank you all so much for watching. There'll be no live coverage this weekend. There's PFL, but there is MK tomorrow. So we're going to preview some of the weekend's things and then talk about all the other stories in sports. I appreciate you guys watching. If you want to know more about the book club and everything else we're doing on Substack, you can go over here. And I just appreciate you all so much. Until next time, thank you so much for watching. Stay frosty, bitches. Bye.